Bolada. Good morning to you all. Thank you very much indeed for the introduction. Thank you so much to AFSA for inviting me once again. It's been 6 years. I think I was in Slough. Remember Slough? Anybody there? I got a standing ovation, by the way, so no pressure. But I mean, obviously, I've paid a lot of attention to what AFSA have been doing over the years, and I'm delighted, obviously, to be able to spend a bit of time with you today. I'm now the Chancellor of Manchester University, the first Muslim Chancellor of Manchester University, so I'm delighted to have that role too. And as been referenced, I mean, I'm very old now, I'm 60, would you believe it? I was Chief Prosecutor, as has been said, for the North West of England. Before that, I was Director of Prosecutions in London. I've spent 35 years or thereabouts in the legal profession. I don't like lawyers, but that's just the nature of life, isn't it? When I left prosecuting in 2015, I then became Chief Executive of the country's Police and Crime Commissioners. And some of you, of course, will have a very strong relationship with, well, is that the right word, with your Police and Crime Commissioner. So I know them very well. I know how they operate. As has been referenced a moment ago, I'm also the only non-white member of the Independent Press Standards Organisation, which of course is the organisation that deals with complaints against national media. So I know the editors of all the national newspapers very well, and some of them you may not necessarily like, but that's the nature of business. And what I wanted to talk to you about today, I mean, I was just reflecting actually when I was listening to that about the journey that we're on. I just wanted to tell you that we are still in the foothills of our journey when it comes to a more diverse leadership group. My first book, by the way, was called The Prosecutor. It came out in 1 week into lockdown, and it's about to be turned into an 8-part Netflix drama. And the actor playing me is much more handsome than I am, so I will take that. This book will not be turned into a drama because it is a drama. And it's basically stems from a conversation I had with the former Prime Minister. She, Theresa May, I was sitting down talking to her, and she said, Nazir, how can there be structural racism in this country when you are the Chief Prosecutor? And I said, have you got a few minutes? And we had a very, very detailed conversation, a very lengthy conversation, where I tried to explain to her, and I did, that just because you reach the top or near the top of your organisation, which is why the book is called Race to the Top, does not make you immune from hate, does not prevent you from receiving bigotry, does not mean that you don't have the obstacles that others have had to go through. I mentioned, being a lawyer. When I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, I had no role models as lawyers. In fact, I had 3, actually. 3 lawyers that I looked up to. One was Atticus Finch from To Kill a Mockingbird. The second was Mahatma Gandhi, who you may not know was a lawyer. And the third was Nelson Mandela, who you may not know was a lawyer. So one was fictional, one was murdered, and the other one was in prison at the time. And those were my role models. And why is it important to have role models? Of course it's important. Because you don't know the journey that you can go on. Unless you know where you're going, you don't know how to get there, do you, surely? And look across the sector. We just mentioned policing a moment ago. How many chief constables are people of colour?
Still
None. There's only ever been one. So anybody from Kent, good luck to you. You had Mike Fuller for a few years, more than a decade ago. So there has been one in its history, and there are none right now. And I've sit on panels for interviewing chief constables, and I have done recently, and I can't see the pipeline. I don't see the deputies stepping up or being selected. I don't see the assistant commissioners or whatever reaching the heights. So that's that. How many chief fire officers are people of colour? You don't surprise me. How many NHS Trust chief executives? Top 50 in this country, the largest top 50. How many? 1. 25% of NHS staff are people of colour. Yet there is 1 out of top 50 NHS trusts have a CEO that's a person of colour. You can go everywhere, and every institution, and what are we? We're 14% of the population, I think. That's the latest census figure. So 1 in 7 people in this country are people of colour. But we're not visible. You do not see us in leadership positions. You do not see us making decisions. You do not see us standing up. Yes, we have, and this is something to be celebrated, a brown Prime Minister. It's fantastic that a privately educated, extremely wealthy, Oxbridge brown person can become Prime Minister. Absolutely. Yeah, it's really important to see that figure and say, I can be that if I'm privately educated, go to Oxbridge and I'm a multimillionaire. But, you know, when I live in South Manchester, and I live in Wythenshawe, where, you know, Marcus Rashford comes from Wythenshawe. And 1 in 3 Wythenshawians, I don't know if that word exists, I just made it up, young people will go to university. 1 in 3. Next door in Sale, 1 in 2 go to university. Are you telling me that 2 neighbourhoods away, they are 50% more intelligent? Yeah, well but the data tells us that, surely that's the answer. The reality is it's about opportunity, it's about the support, it's about the progression, it's about the obstacles being overcome. And I had a conversation with somebody not long ago, and I believe this to be true. If you're a person of colour, if you fail once, that is it. We are not allowed to make mistakes. And why do I say that? History tells us that. Experience tells us that. That it doesn't matter how many mistakes anybody else makes, and no disrespect to the British white men in this room, but how the hell does fat Sam Allardyce keep getting a job? How? You see a club struggling with relegation, let's get Sam in, and they get relegated, and he'll get another job next year. But think about the black Premier League managers. Think about them, because there aren't any. Keep thinking about them, because when they are appointed, they're out the door the moment their team struggles, and they're never ever selected again and appointed again. That is another challenge. That we aren't even allowed to fail. We aren't allowed to make mistakes, but we've got to tackle that. We've got to call it out. And I think what was said a moment ago about, it is good news. What I just read a moment ago and what you saw on the PowerPoint. I don't do PowerPoint, by the way. My son said to me, forget the power, get to the point. And that's really important, is that we talk to each other about the reality of life. It's great that you have, 17 people now being worked with, etc., etc. But that doesn't deal with the 3.5 million others that aren't being worked with, and the challenges and obstacles we face. And I'll go back in terms of my own journey. When I was in the 90s, was very much easier because we didn't have something then that is the bane of our lives now: key performance indicators. And I had no KPIs, so I could go off and do my stuff. Nobody came back to me and said, Nazir, you failed in X number of cases last week. Blah, blah, blah. Nobody knew, right? And so I was able to push myself. And again, I go back to my point about not having any role models. I don't drink, which was a problem. I'll tell you why it's a problem. Because all the opportunities were only talked about on a Friday evening after work, down the pub. Lawyers would sit around and decide, well, actually, this is available, that's available. But if you weren't there, if you weren't in that room, you didn't hear about them. And it's true for women too, by the way. You just don't hear those opportunities. So I had to simply do what others have done, I imagine, and that's work 10 times harder. I did not, when I left prosecuting in 2015, I had 120 days leave to take. And they wouldn't pay me 120 days leave. I did not take leave. I simply thought, I need to work. And the other side of that is in terms of engagement with communities. There's an issue for every agency and organisation, but do it on their terms. The community needs you at weekends when they've got time off. They need you in the evenings when you aren't working necessarily. And yet, We expect them to come to us. I remember when I was dealing with the first knife crime epidemic in London 20 odd years ago, I told my teams, right, okay, we need to go and talk to the people most impacted by these crimes, young people, particularly young people from minority communities. And they said, yes, let's invite them to our offices. Guess how many came? None. No, I said, no, you got that wrong. Engagement, we go to them. I remember being above a bookmaker's in Harlesden in North London, talking to all these young men wearing bandanas across their faces. I didn't know who they were. I have no idea who they were. But in that conversation, I learned about how education had played a part in their lives, how the environment was making them feel unsafe, how their schooling, how poor policing, all of those issues that you're probably familiar with now, but I was hearing for the first time. And they were sharing with me for the first time. I went back to the office and I said to my teams, right, we need to do something about this. And the HR person said, Nazir, you didn't carry out a risk assessment when you went there. I'm back now, aren't I? We will put barriers in places where there shouldn't be any barriers. And then when I went with that information, this was 2002, and we had a Home Office then that listened, right? And so I sat down with the Home Secretary and I sat down with other ministers and said, here are the issues. And they went round and we developed what was then the very first serious violent crime strategy for the government. And it was built on the views, the learning from the people most impacted. You need to listen to them. That's what I kept saying over and over again. And thankfully, back then, they did. Government did, authorities did, institutions did, and they were getting better at responding. And then something happened. I'm not talking about a change of government, I'm talking about austerity. Because what happens when there is a period of austerity? When resources are challenging? Well, two things that we should be doing, we stop doing. One is training. You know, we can't afford it. You know, here's an online thingy, fill it in, right? Rather than proper. The second thing that fails and we lose is community engagement. We suddenly decide we can't talk to people because that's costly. It's not core business. How dare you say that? They pay your salaries, don't they? They pay our salaries. Well, yours, not mine. They pay, you know, the point is they deserve to be heard from. And yet, community engagement, let's find a cheaper way of doing it. You know, let's not do it if we can. Yet they are the key things you need to carry on doing. And we stopped doing that in 2010. Literally stopped doing that. And that meant we went backwards. So after I was going to say the real impetus after Macpherson, the Stephen Lawrence report, where people were realizing there were serious issues that needed to be addressed, we decided, hang on a minute, let's deal with other things. And yet we realized that was the wrong thing to do. And why is it important? Because often when we talk about diversity, Doctor, a lot of people talk about numbers. You know, we don't have the right number, blah, blah, blah. Think about what it's about. What is it really about? It's about better decision making. And one of the things that I always think of, because I've met with the Grenfell families, is what happened in Grenfell. As I say, there's a whole chapter on Grenfell in my report on Monday. I'm not going to touch on that now, but I will touch on this bit. Do you really think that cladding that was, you know what it was, would have been put there if the people who lived in the tower were part of the decision-making process? No, of course it wouldn't have. Do you think that 12 British white people from Kensington and Chelsea Borough Council knew what was going on in that tower or cared about what was going on in that tower? No, they didn't. So it's about decision making, that quality decision making. You know, one of the things that I can share this with you. The Sunday Times have been recently doing some features on Gwent police. Have you watched that? Listened to that? And the family came to me. It was an ex-police officer, deceased police officer. Family came to me with a mobile phone which he had, which contained images and messages, which are quite shocking. And so I didn't know where to go with it. They said, we don't give it to the police, right? That's the level of trust they had in the police. Don't give it to HMI or independent office police. where do we go with it? I said, this is the only people I know who could deal with this properly is the press in this scenario. They will interrogate that, they'll get the evidence, and what they found was shocking to the core. Police officers were sharing an image of the Grenfell Fire building with the Great Muslim Bake-Off written underneath it. 2/3 of the victims at Grenfell were Muslims. Now, how do you think the Muslim communities of this country would have felt about that, or do feel about that? And these were police officers. Now, there's nothing, in my view, worse than a bigot with a warrant card. Because if you've got power, you will use that power. And where are we? You are 9 times more likely to be stopped and searched if you're a black man. In fact, you're 24 times more likely to be stopped and searched if you're a black man than if you could be a professor. There is one professor of chemistry who's black in this country. And he has not got any research funding for more than 10 years. There are only 160 black professors of the tens of thousands in this country. What's going on? Where is that massive progress that we keep hearing about? When the Sewell report, and do you know about the Sewell report? Yes. When the Sewell report came out a year and a half ago, government commission report, it found that, well, initially, it found that there was no institutional racism in this country. It even said there were some benefits to the slave trade, which still shocks me to the core. And then when Lord Sewell, as he now is, this is what happens when you do the right thing, as far as some people are concerned, when he was giving evidence to parliamentary select committees, he backtracked like nobody's business. Oh, no, I didn't mean that. Oh, we didn't say that. Oh, yes, you did. Oh, we'll change that. This is the problem, is there are certain people who will try to minimize our experiences, who will try to minimize the obstacles that we have faced and continue to face, and then play to an agenda which is, that we're victims. Stop being a victim. How many times have I heard that? Well, maybe because I'm a victim. I was brutalized when I was a young man. I had 3 men used my head as a football. I only lived because some taxi driver, a Pakistani brown taxi driver, stopped and pulled these men off me and got me into the back of the car and got me home. So I wouldn't be here were it not for him. That was my experience then, but that's still the experience now. So you're 9 times more likely to be stopped or searched. You are more likely to be arrested, you're more likely to be charged, you're more likely to be convicted, you're more likely to go to prison if you're a black person on the same evidence as a white person. So we're comparing apples with apples here. It's not as if, I'm sure the evidence, no, on the same evidence, that's the reality. And when I was talking to, people said about, just talking about legal profession, one of my last acts as a prosecutor was to get a judge struck off. This judge was at Preston Crown Court, just around the corner, and he said to one of my prosecutors, this was a case of assault, well, I've got some time this afternoon, can you get the witness, the victim, to come along, or the complainant, to come along, and we'll hear the case this afternoon. The prosecutor goes, no, we have to give this person time. He said, well, I'm looking at the evidence, Patel, surely all they've got is a shop to look after, surely they can come here. And the prosecutor, to their credit, said, Dr. Patel can't come this afternoon, but I know what I'm going to do with you. And went back to me, I got him struck off. And then I learned that not only was he a Crown Criminal Court judge, he was also an immigration judge. Now what does that tell you? You talked about unconscious bias. What about conscious bias? The reality is that some people are bloody racists. Some people are misogynists. They're disablists, they're homophobes, and they are in positions of power. So what do we need to do about them? We call them out. We do not keep it to ourselves. We do not think, well, actually, I'm going to get through this, so I don't want to rock the boat. Rock the boat. All right? And this is why networks are important. This is why AFSA is important. I prosecuted the Rochdale grooming gangs. You probably heard of them. And I led the prosecution of grooming gangs back in 2011. And others didn't want to do that. I thought, hang on a minute, I believe these girls. Of course I believe these girls. Who's watched the BBC film Three Girls? Again, that's my case. The actor playing me that was much more handsome than I am. But that case was the Rochdale grooming gang case. The case itself, straightforward. British Pakistani, British Afghani men, as far as you're aware, were abusing young white girls. Actually, they were abusing young Asian girls too, but that never made the press. So be it. Guys are convicted in May 2012. Then this happened. The world looks to me, Nazir, could you please explain what's going on? You know what they wanted me to say? It's because you weren't prosecuting brown people, that's your problem. What I wanted to say, what I did say was, it was a cohort of young girls in this country who were just not listened to. They were ignored. They were treated with contempt by the authorities. They simply said to them, you've got a chaotic background, you're troubled, you're in the care system, you don't matter. I made the point over and over again, that is the issue here, is that there are millions of young victims who are just not listened to. That is the issue. Then something happened, and I wasn't prepared for this. The far right, which at that time was the British National Party, decided that I damaged their narrative. Their narrative is that all brown black people were sex abusers. When they discovered that a brown person had prosecuted these guys, I damaged their narrative. The next thing they did was this. They put it on Facebook. This is 2012, and this is before the concept of fake news. They put stuff on Facebook saying Nazir Afzal did not prosecute these guys. Right? Despite the fact that it's in Parliament, it's in Hansard, the Prime Minister, David Cameron, rang me up. I'm being carried on the streets they should have carried me on the streets of Manchester on their shoulders. Despite the fact that everybody knew I'd done the right thing, and the only person who'd done the right thing, they said that I hadn't. Then this happened. Now, by this time, 2012, I've prosecuted serial killers, serious organised crime, you name it, the most horrible people that society can inflict upon us, but they'd never come to my door. Suddenly, I had far-right thugs outside of my house. I had to have a police officer outside of my house from Greater Manchester Police for 2 weeks because that was the security advice I was given. I had to tell my teenage kids at the time, Prime Minister's got a police officer outside his door. It was the only way I could provide reassurance to them that what was going on. I had to have panic alarms placed in every room in my house. I had to teach my 9-year-old boy how to use a panic alarm in case somebody tried to break in. They could only go to school in a taxi for 4 months because that was the security advice I had been given. In one day, I got 17,000 letters, including letters with feces in them, calling for me to be sacked and deported. So this is what's happening to me. And I must admit, I remember my PA running down the corridor with a letter, which she said, don't show him the letter. If it wasn't for the people around me, and by that, the people, my network, my staff, my colleagues, they would have drowned me. I was close to destruction at that time. Literally, I felt, this job's not worth it. It's not worth me suffering, even though I got every decision right. And why do they think they went for it? If I had been John Smith, Chief Prosecutor, do you think that would have happened to John Smith, Chief Prosecutor? No, of course it wouldn't have. And I was saved by somebody called Keir Starmer. I don't know if you heard of him. Because Keir was my boss at the time. And he said, right, I didn't know this at the time. He said, Nazir will not have any meetings between 2 and 4 because he has to do the school run. Nazir will not have to go to any overnight conferences or meetings because he needs to be at home to provide for his family, to provide them security and safety. And that happened for several weeks and months, and I didn't know it was happening. I was wondering why I didn't have any meetings at 3 o'clock. I was wondering why nobody wanted me in London at short notice, right? And it was because you have to look after your staff. You have to look after them. That's really looking after them. But that's how I coped. My networks helped me survive. My staff and my colleagues helped me survive. My boss helped me survive. And it did something. It made me stronger when it would have been easier to be weaker. The next thing I did was I'm going to go after every sex abuser in this country. And I set up the national panel. which led to Max Clifford, Rolf Harris, Stuart Hall, hundreds of other prosecutions of sex abusers. We got to the stage in 2015 where we had the highest conviction rate for sexual abuse in our history. All of it built on the experience of those who were impacted by this. They guided me, they helped me develop the first national guidelines for tackling this case. And it is a massive problem. You may have missed it, but just before COVID, the Office for National Statistics came back and said that in this country, more than 3.1 million adults were sexually abused as children. So let that sink in. 1 in 20 of us were sexually abused as children. How many people in this room? What class? Think about every classroom. Think about every workshop, every bar, every club you're in. That is the pandemic that will outlive the pandemic that we're in. And the way that we got better was, going back to my point about diversity, was listening to the people who were most impacted by this, telling us where the obstacles were, where the problems were, giving us the ability to learn from their experiences and put them into place and fix them. It's gone backwards since then for all the reasons you'll appreciate. Resources aren't there. People have got complacent. Why do 23 years since Macpherson? You would think that we should have made massive improvements, but we haven't. Somebody said to me the other day, what can I do? As in, what can that person do? And I said this: did Rosa Parks ask permission to sit on that bloody chair on that bloody bus? Did she? Don't ask permission. You have the power of one person to change the world, the power of one person to change your institutions, or your communities, your families, your groups. It really comes down to, don't wait for somebody else to tell you what to do. Listen to the people who are most impacted and then do it. You could not, I don't know, we always seem to think, either we need our leaders to tell us, get on with it, or we need a strategy meeting. I mentioned that violent crime strategy earlier on. It was brilliant back in 2002, and then it disappeared. It was in some filing cabinet. In 2018, my nephew was murdered in a knife attack in Birmingham. And the Prime Minister then, somebody called Theresa May, invited me to a summit to deal with knife crime. I said to her officials, what are you going to discuss? And they said, we're going to discuss the serious violent crime strategy. I said, send it to me. Guess what they sent to me? The same bloody one that we'd done 20 years ago. They just pulled it. I said, I'm not coming. Because you have not made any progress. This is just a talking shop. If it's a talking shop, it's not worth being there. And I said that publicly. And something happened in March 2018. Anybody heard about it since? We love talking shops. We love setting up a meeting and organising a meeting with us, online or in person, and actually we make no difference. I want to see difference. And you mentioned about, I think it was earlier on, about making a difference. You make a difference by acting differently. Don't follow like sheep doing what everybody else has done. Don't simply take something off a shelf and think, well, that's our new strategy. I'm fed up of people reading a new strategy or developing a new strategy or coming up with some new way of working which will die a death like every other way of working, and try and reinvent the wheel when in fact you don't need to reinvent the wheel. Look at what's already working, where the best practice is. It really just bugged me somewhat that we seem to think that we've one example of this, and no disrespect to EDI officers in the room, it's not your fault, but it's become a bit of an industry. To my mind, if you really are serious about EDI, you have your EDI lead on the board, not being consulted on, or you feed in your thoughts on the board. Be part of the decision-making process. Then you will see a difference. Too often it's, we're delivering, they'll deliver some training, they'll provide some mentoring, they'll provide some coaching, they'll provide some support, but it actually makes zero difference. You look back and you see that 0.1% difference in senior leadership, cadre, or you see something, but it has literally nothing. If we want to see change, then we need to change the sea. We need people in that room who will deliver the change with us, and not simply outside the room. And when I was looking, for example, a lot of the people in this book said, Nazir, I'm scared. Somebody who's in the top 100 media personalities in this country, I won't say any more about this person, said, Nazir, if I told you what's been happening to me, it would shock you to the core. I said, well, tell me then. And they said, it would destroy my career. I said, you are one of the 100 most powerful people in this country's media, yet you will not talk on the record. When I went to the health professionals, and Jack mentioned health inequalities earlier on, never mind black mothers and brown mothers who are suffering. Look at what happened in COVID. The inequalities that were visible there. Do you remember in the early days of COVID, nurses and doctors were dying, and they all happened to be black and brown. So the inequalities are there. When I went to health professionals, and I mean senior health professionals, time and time again, they said two things to me. One, Nazir, I've signed a non-disclosure agreement. And that means that I cannot talk about it for legal reasons. Okay, I'll accept that. Well, I don't accept it, but I'll accept it. The second was what I said a moment ago, that's my career finished. If I tell you what's happening to me, that's my career finished. I took out my health chapter because I could not get one senior health professional of colour to speak on the record. Not one. Our National Health Service, we're 25% people of colour, not one senior leader of colour would talk to me on the record. I thought, I'm not even bothering with that chapter. I'm going to write about how bad it is and not bother with the stories from people because it's not fair to you. But when you look across business, you look across sport, think about what happened to Azim Rafiq at Yorkshire Cricket Club. Think about the experiences of people of colour in sport. Think about the people experiences in the theatre. Where are they? Never mind the one or two visible figures that you see. In business, in you name it, sector after sector after sector, struggle after struggle after struggle. The role models aren't there. The leaders aren't there. The people that we should be looking to aren't there. And the answers, we often do the same thing. Do you know about the Rooney Rule? Have you heard about the Rooney Rule? Right, well, I'll share it. It's nothing to do with Wayne Rooney, by the way. It's an American concept, and this often works. The theory is that when you are recruiting to a senior role, you make sure that your shortlist, your final shortlist, contains at least one BME member of person, because that will give them a chance. Guess what happens? That person is not appointed, then this is what happens. That person, surely, I think I've been badly treated here, I might go to a tribunal. Tribunal goes, well, you were shortlisted. So the Rooney Rule, which was meant to increase the numbers of people of colour is now being used to prevent people acting and taking challenge. So even what we thought was a good idea is now being used against us. And that's typical. But I'll share one little tidbit from LFB. A senior black leader, he said he applied for a role, he got the role, he didn't get the role, and he was then told, try next time, and he tried next time, and he didn't get the role. And then realized that all the white leaders around him were getting mentoring, coaching, opportunity support, tutoring. He was being sold, send in your CV. He was given next to zero support. And that's the experience of all of us, I'm afraid, is that we don't have access to the positions of power. We don't have access to the skills, the support, the coaching, the mentoring, all the things that you undoubtedly expect to have, you don't have. So it becomes luck. It's luck if you are successful. So going back to what Theresa May said to me, surely, you getting to where you got to, Nazir, must be more than luck. No, it was. Literally, when I was appointed in 2001 to be as chief in London, assistant chief in London, the process involved a legal case study and a final panel. Now, two things. The final panel was chaired by David Calvert-Smith, QC, the DPP, and it's a real credit to him that he appointed the first Muslim chief prosecutor 3 months after 9/11. It's a real credit to him. But the legal case study, and I had no idea about this at all, but prior to that I'd been doing some work in headquarters policy, and I had developed the policy on sexual offences, particularly special. And guess what the legal case study was? It was about the policy on sexual offences. So it was complete and utter luck that I had the subject in front of me and which I was the expert at that time. Luck. So the next 20 years would not have happened had that had not happened. But you rest assured, every other person applying was given Rolls-Royce support. So that's not going to change, is it? It's not going to change unless we individually change. I go back to what I said about, unless you act differently, you'll make no difference. But at the end of the day, it comes down to listening. And leadership skills, we can go through loads of them. The one that I think is the least valued is listening. People just, you don't get an award. Did you give an award last night for best listener? No. Yeah. So, listening and then acting upon what you heard is the answer. When I prosecuted Stuart Hall, BBC presenter Stuart Hall, he was found guilty of the abuse of 11 women and girls, going back 30 odd years, and found not guilty of the abuse of one woman. She was in her 30s, she was abused when she was a teenager. And I went to her afterwards and I said, I'm really sorry that I couldn't give you closure. And she looked me in the eye and said, Nazir, when you listened to me and you believed me, you gave me closure. That the justice system may have failed her, whatever it is, but somebody in a position of influence and power listened and believed. I've got this website. I haven't updated it. It has a Twitter feed on the front page, but the back page is a contact page, and it works. Please, I beg you. And every day, victim survivors will contact me from all over the world and say, Nazir, I've got this problem, blah, blah, blah. I can't do anything for them. I'm not Batman. But what I can do is signpost them for help. But there was one email I got 6 months ago, which I'll share with you. And it started, Dear Mr. Afzal, you won't remember me. I was one of the victims of Stuart Hall 10 years ago, which you prosecuted successfully. I now have terminal cancer. I only have a few weeks to live. I wanted you to know that my life began when you did what you did. She suffered for 30 odd years, total utter trauma, not being listened to, not being believed, her whole life, I don't know, a shadow of what it could have been. And yet she wanted to tell me in the last weeks of her life, for the last 10 years of her life, had been when she really finally lived. I didn't know how to respond to that. I spent a couple of days wondering, thank you? That's not the response, is it? So I sent her my phone number and I spoke to her. And she reiterated what I just said a moment ago. And then a few weeks later, she passed away. And I made it my point to go to her funeral. This woman I did not know at all, save for being a piece of paper in a case 10 years ago. I felt it's important for me to go to her funeral, to almost from me, to realize and recognize the impact that she says I had on her life. I think it was Maya Angelou who said, it's not about what you do, it's about how you make people feel. And we do not realize how important it is that we make sure that the people that we're working with, that we're surrounded by, that we're engaging with, realize that they are the center of the universe. to us at that time. Don't go into a room and think, I've only got 5 minutes. Give them 4 minutes and 59 seconds. Listen to them. Look at their eyes. Talk to them. Understand and appreciate them. There's nobody on earth, quite frankly, that will not ever forget that interaction that you have with them. And she says that I changed her life for the better. She changed my life for the better. Thank you very much indeed.